Welcome, or maybe better put, welcome back, since this is really kind of our second week of class, but the first week of our class being online. So this is the first of what are going to be many lecture bursts. So the idea is trying to condense what was supposed to be about a 50-minute lecture into about 15 minutes or so. Up to this point, we've established that Tibet has been often romanticized and sensationalized by different accounts, but we really haven't located Tibet on the map, except for that very first day when I gave you a very, kind of a simple a layout of where Tibet could be located. So the rest of today's lecture will be beginning to come up with a working definition of Tibet so we can kind of situate it and its neighbors. So this is one of many maps of Tibet that were produced by non-Tibetans. This map specifically was produced in the early 20th century by National Geographic magazine. So just take a second and look at what the boundaries of this map are, what neighbors lie to the north, south, west, and east of Tibet, and how they are named. The one problem looking at maps of Tibet, especially early on, is that Tibet, as the word, wasn't used by the people that inhabited the area. Basically, Tibet is a Latinization of a word, and maybe even a mistake from early explorers and missionaries to the region. So Tibetans usually refer to their homeland as P, so that kind of PHO, and then I have the Tibetan script below it. Now, again, in many of the early sources, they don't refer to a P per se, and they certainly don't refer to a Tibet. But as early as the Song dynasty, and so about the 10th century, there was a region referred to as Tufan. And there are some disagreements among historians about, perhaps what region this Tufan refers to. But many believe it was an attempt to render the word Pe into Chinese, so either as Tufan or Tubo. So we first see Tibet in 1827, spelled as Thibet, and many historians believe that's either an English rendering of the Persian term Tubat or an early attempt to Latinize Tufan, or which may have actually been pronounced early on as Tubat. Right? So again, Tibet is just a Latinization of the Chinese variant of P. The first account of Tibet and its borders that we're going to look at in class are those provided by Ippolito Desideri. He was an Italian Jesuit who traveled to Tibet as a Catholic missionary. So again, a Jesuit is just of one denomination or orders of Catholic priests. Many believe that he was one of the first, if not the first, European to successfully learn the Tibetan language, and certainly he was in Tibet for a long period of time, mostly in Lhasa, which is the capital, where he lived from 1716 to 1721. And it's likely because this book, his mission to Tibet, was written in a period where there was no attempt to standardize Tibetan language or the Latinization of Tibetan language. It's easily to be confused with the places that he's referring to. So here's just a quick chart knowing that actually Tibetan today, there are several ways of Latinizing it or putting it into English. And of course, there are also Chinese names. So Desideri, he talks about what looks like Kartol, but again, this is just a Latinization of the Tibetan Gartok, and then the Chinese, the corresponding Chinese Gar Yasha. Desideri refers to a place called Tsiling, which again is a Latinization of Tsiling, the Tibetan, and the Chinese is Xining, and of course Lhasa, which is pretty standard. I want us to return to the National Geographic map and upon it superimpose the boundaries of Tibet that were recorded by Desideri in his account, which of course was written over 100 years prior to the National Geographic map. So in his account, Desideri notes the western and eastern boundaries of the region, which are Gartuk and Xining, respectively. He then says that the northern boundary of the region was created or is created by the natural boundary of the Kunlun Mountains. Lhasa, by this time, had already been established as the cultural, political, economic, and religious center of the region. The southern boundaries are essentially Sikkim, and then if you draw a almost a south-north line to Xining, you'll find its eastern and southern boundaries. Desideri also notes two large cities between Gartuk and Lhasa, that of Gyantse and of Sigatse. And of course, throughout his account, and what also helps us compare Desideri's account with Kapstein, is the description of Tibet as being mountainous, or the famous Tibetan phrase, the land of snows, which is noted in Kapstein. So take a look at this map, which begins to capture the high altitudes of the region. And here is another map that will hopefully help us appreciate the high altitude of the region. And this is important because the natural habitat of Tibet will, of course, shape the experiences of the people that live in it. Kapstein offers a slightly more complex description of the borders of Tibet, and he really draws upon kind of indigenous or local understandings of how Tibet was divided, at least historically, and those are of the three circuits of Nagri, which is highlighted in orange, the four horns of Ul means central Tibet, and then the six ranges of Amdo and Kham, which are eastern Tibet. And so this map shows these divisions. You'll see there's a fourth division known as Qiangtang. So although it's spelled with a J, the pronunciation is more like a CH. And the reason that this isn't included in the otherwise three divisions of Tibet is that it's mostly inhabitable. So very, very few people live there. So again, we have Nagri, Ulzang, and then Kham and Amdo as really the three main divisions of historical Tibet, which of course today are incorporated in the People's Republic of China. So Ulzang being in the Tibet Autonomous Region, and then Amdo, primarily the regions of Qinghai and Gansu, and then Kham, which would be the western edges of Sichuan and the northwestern edges of Yunnan. So although generally speaking, Tibet is a high altitude location, by just looking at the previous map, we are able to see that it spans a large geographic space spanning east to west, north and south. Therefore, there's a lot of natural diversity in the area. So in addition to just mountains, we can see with these photographs, the one on the top left, the top right and bottom left taken by me, we see again that there are grasslands, there are valleys, land that's ample and conducive for farming. And of course, with the photo on the bottom right, which I didn't take, there are also these kind of barren high altitude places. Therefore, the people of the lands are often reflect the environments they live in. And so historically, there were really kind of three main groups of people: the nomads, Tibetan Drokpa, which are essentially people of the highlands; farmers, or Singba, people of the fields; and then a third division called Samadrok. And these were mixed patterns of agriculturalists and nomads. And the Tibetan term literally means neither of earth nor pasture. I agree with Capstein that we shouldn't limit our definitions of Tibet to merely geographic boundaries, which of course shift and change over time, but rather we need to think about Tibet more broadly. He proposes at least four other ways of defining Tibet. One is a linguistic Tibet, and that's the region essentially from northern Pakistan to Gansu province in China, where Tibetan languages are spoken. And of course, languages being plural, because as we'll see later on this quarter, there are many languages that belong to the Tibetan family. There's also a social economic Tibet, and that is a region that was historically defined by high altitude pastoralism, or essentially nomadism, and barley based agriculture. We'll see just how important barley was as the staple food for Tibetans. There's also a cultural Tibet, and that is the region or regions that use Tibetan language as the ecclesiastical or the religious language, similar to how Latin was used by the Catholic Church, and as well as the administrative language of the area, and where quote unquote Tibetan Buddhism dominates and has dominated. And finally, there's political Tibet, and of course, this is the most controversial and contested of the definitions, because for many, Tibet is just simply part of the People's Republic of China. For others, it's a disputed part of the People's Republic of China, and for others still, it's an occupied country that should be independent. We'll look at the various arguments that inform these stances later on.